I'm attorney Phil Jusino, and this is Finding Common Ground here on Altis, WLINY, Long Island, New York, the world. My special guest tonight is Larry Zacharies. Larry, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Before I start chatting with Larry, if you want to see this show every Saturday at 10 a.m. on channel 115 Altis, and for your insomniacs, Thursday mornings, 1 a.m. on channel 20. This show will eventually be on YouTube, and you can see that if you miss it and someone tells you about it. Go to YouTube, WLINY Internet Radio, and then there's a whole list of shows. You just go to Altis, and this is about the 11th or 12th show. So, Larry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'll be actually 44 in a couple of weeks. I've lived in young guy. Lived in Suffolk County my whole life. Born and raised in Holbrook. My parents are actually still there. I'm in my 21st year in law enforcement. I've been a paramedic for 24 years. Along the way, went to law school. Got married, had a couple of kids.
Wow. Okay.
So I've been busy for the 44 years.
Where'd you go to high school?
Sachem High School.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yep.
North or the other one?
North. Before there was anything else, it was the only Sachem there was.
It's a very big school. I went to Smithtown West.
Okay.
And we would play in the playoffs. And that's a big school.
I think we had almost 1,300 in my graduating class. So.
Mine was about 5, and that seemed like a lot. So
yeah.
imagine 3 times almost. Now you're an assistant police chief at Stony Brook?
Correct.
How long have you been in that position?
I've been there for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in June.
And before that, you were a police officer where?
I was a police officer and a sergeant in the NYPD.
Okay. And how was the move from NYPD to Stony Brook?
Definitely a little different. Unexpected. It was just an opportunity that kind of came. I wasn't really ready to go, but the quality of life and being closer to home and
sure.
9 miles versus 60 miles was a lot of other factors, but definitely different.
How long were you a city cop?
It's about 11 and a half years.
Now, when you came here, did you assume the position of assistant police chief right away?
Yes, that was the job I interviewed for, and that was the position that I took right away. There was it was basically an appointment.
Now, when you were in the city, what kind of patrol did you have?
When I left, I was a sergeant in Jackson Heights in the 115. I did plainclothes street narcotics in the precinct. I did regular patrol and a midnight patrol. For the 6.5 years prior to that, I was in the emergency service unit and in K9. And then prior to that, I was a cop in the 113 precinct in Jamaica.
So then you come to Stony Brook. Very different.
Very different.
Mm-hmm. Did you like it? You like the change?
I do like it. It's different. It's certainly the main focus is certainly community, community-oriented policing and community-based policing. Got its different challenges. Stony Brook is it's a massive place. I mean, it's basically like a city.
Yeah.
So there's.
I got lost there a few times.
Yeah, I every once in a while. So it's it's much different, but like I said, all the benefits and the quality of life issues have made it a smarter choice.
And a much shorter commute is everything. I live 3 miles from my office is down the hall.
Yeah.
And I can make it home in no time. That's a lot. Because did you used to commute by train?
No, luckily I was a car guy. So for the most of the time I was in Queens. For about 4.5 years I was in Brooklyn, assigned to the Brooklyn Army Terminal, which was 71 miles from my house.
Wow.
I lost half my life commuting.
And of course there's never any traffic on the LIE.
Well, luckily I worked midnights, but it's really only one way to get there. It was just the Bell Parkway, get to the Verrazano, keep going.
And a lot of tolls.
And then get off. Yeah, it was bad.
I don't think the Verrazano was up to $50 yet. No, it's ridiculous.
I'm not even sure what it is anymore.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
You go over. I have my Easy Pass, but it's always replenishing it, and I don't even travel that much.
Well, now there's no prices anymore. There's no toll booths, so you basically just go right through. Get there, and it is what it is.
You go right through. Yeah. Now, in 2017, you ran for sheriff.
Yes.
Suffolk County Sheriff. Was that your first foray into politics?
It was. I was a committeeman in Smithtown, a Republican committeeman. But I got involved in local politics with the full intention of eventually running for sheriff. As crazy as that may sound, and as crazy as people may have thought it was, that was my intention. But that was my first.
Now, you ran a good race.
Thank you.
You got beat by the current Sheriff Tulin, but the big story, I think, was the primary.
Yes.
How you were the underdog, right? And you took on Phil Boyle, and you beat him.
Pretty much for the good portion of my life, anytime I've been told that I can't do something or
makes you want to do it more.
It definitely does. It's motivation. It has always been, and that in particular, the politics of the politics is about the only way to describe it. There's good people in politics.
Oh, sure.
There's people who get into it for the right reasons. There's people who support it for the right reasons. But then there's a certain percentage of people who are not in it for the right reasons. I'm using very kind words. So it was really fuel for me, honestly, and the many obstacles that were attempted to be put in my way, party politics and backroom politics, really just, and the fact that I had everyday average people getting behind and supporting us.
That keeps you going.
It definitely kept me going, and I had to fight. So
now I worked on, one of my co-hosts was Frank Vetro. He ran for the legislature and he did a primary.
yes,
Now when you decided to do a primary, obviously Phil Boyle was the Republicans guy because they say who they want.
yep.
And you wanted to do a primary. And you knew it was an uphill, well, you thought it was an uphill battle maybe. And how did you go about it? You had to go out and get all the signatures. Tell us a little bit about that.
So if you talk to other people, they'll tell you a different story. But the real story is this: that I went to my roots. I went to my networks of people, being in the volunteer fire service and working in all the different places that I've worked for my entire life. I knew that I could count on my friends, my colleagues, to really get behind. Team Zacharis. We built that, and it was the really epitome of grassroots. The more they said it couldn't be done, the more they tried to block and really get in the way of the petition gathering, which is an onerous process. For countywide slate, it's 2,000 signatures, but 2,000 really means 4,000 because of
they're going to challenge.
You're going to challenge it, and you're going to be in court and everything else. You're no strangers to that,
No,
certainly.
I'm aware of that.
So we, our goal was to get out there and to get as many as we could, while knowing full well that, the party designated candidate is going to qualify no matter what. I think Boyle had something like 13 or 14,000 signatures.
Wow.
Because all 10 towns, all the committee people in all 10 towns, their job is to go out and get the signatures for the petitions. So
Sure.
he's getting on no matter what. Now I have to worry about A, qualifying, and then B, withstanding challenges, which is certainly going to come from within inside the party, knowing full well that if I'm successful, in this case, hopefully being successful, then I'm going to become the party candidate.
Right.
So it's a fine line
And
to
you hope
walk.
they get behind you because you're the guy if you win that
Yes,
primary.
and then
right?
even then sometimes, are they behind you? Are they really behind you? And all the political maneuvering that happens behind the scenes.
Mhm.
So
But you won that, and like I said, you made it a good race.
thank
It
you.
was good. Now, how did you find the difference between, let's say, the primary run and the general election?
The challenge was, and I think this year will certainly be interesting with everything being lined up with the federal, moving everything back. In my opinion, that's an advantage for a candidate. It's an advantage for an incumbent. I think it's an advantage for a new person to an office. You have an extended campaign season. So our primary was in September. You got this short 6-week window.
Yeah.
And we had run so hard and so long, and the money became an issue, and trying to do all those things. And we got to remember, I announced in December of 2016 because nobody knew who I was, and it happened with a phone call from Newsday.
Mhm.
And the next day, the article was printed, and boom, I was in the sheriff's race.
Wow.
So we had campaigned for almost a year. That last 6.5 weeks,
tiring.
it's exhausting. It's a big
You got
county,
a full-time job and
full-time job, working
Family.
part-time, family, and trying to make it to all the different places in the 10 towns. It's a big island. Remember, it's bigger than a
Right.
congressional district,
right.
so it's a lot of work.
Right. And again, it's a countywide as opposed to a legislative race where you have your little area.
Which
This
is
is a
still
countywide.
it's still a lot of work to do. It's still, you got to knock
Sure.
on doors, and you have to try to attend as many events as possible.
Like you
and
said,
fundraisers.
Montauk, to Huntington or that
Yeah,
area.
Montauk to Melville.
Melville, right.
Yeah,
It's a lot of ground to cover.
a lot of ground, but we had a great time, and I say we because it was never just me. It was my family, it was my friends, and it was all of the people that got behind. I'll say this effort and the movement in some respects, and people were calling it that. So
Now, when you did the countywide race, what did you learn about the county that maybe you didn't know before you ran?
every town is different, and there are very interesting people in all the different towns. There's so many civic organizations and different groups and moms groups and library groups, and it's impossible.
You got the East End and the West End towns.
So the 5 eastern towns
Right.
is a complete separate
Right.
world, and the 5 western towns, and in particular in the sheriff's race, how those towns interact with the sheriff's office is markedly different. Being in Riverhead and the 5 eastern towns, there's a real motivation and a real connection to that office because they deal with the sheriff a lot
Sure.
more, as do the local municipalities, where in the western end, the Suffolk County Police
It's a
Department
PD,
is,
right.
is the lead agency. So many people, even to this day, oh, you ran for sheriff. I didn't know you. What do you mean you run for sheriff? You've never been a sheriff, though. You worked in the city. No, it's the sheriff, not a deputy sheriff.
Correct.
Well, how are you going to be the sheriff if you've never been a deputy sheriff? Well, you vote for the sheriff. I do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
an elective office.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's an educational part of that too, but
Anything else like you might have picked up that you didn't? Because again, you grew up in a certain area, and then all of a sudden you're running, and I'm sure you've been to Montauk in your life, but now you're knocking on doors in Montauk.
it's different.
It's a little bit different.
And what the east end, the 5 eastern towns are interesting too, because you have certainly the upper echelon, the 1%, and then other areas that are not. And the political leanings are certainly very interesting as you head east,
Right.
for sure.
And then you had to deal with the the people in power in each town. So you had to go to them, and I guess it's different in every town. Some might be more supportive of you.
Yes.
Some might be less supportive of you.
Well, it's interesting, the September 12th was the primary, and September 12th in many cases, I had a lot of support, there's no question. Whether it was they believed in me, they didn't believe in in the other candidate,
Right.
whatever the motivation was. September 13th, I got a lot of friends. I became a very popular guy. Some of those people were with me the whole time, and I remember them because they're still
Right.
with me today. Politics is a funny business. When you're in,
Sure.
when you're in, you're the best. When you're out, you're a pest.
Right.
So you know who your true supporters and your true friends were, who was there prior to September 12th and who was there afterwards.
Okay. Now, running a county-wide, obviously you just said you get to learn about all the different towns. How do you see the political landscape right now of Suffolk County? What challenges are we facing?
I don't care if you're running for town council, for county legislature, for state senate, assembly, congressional district. If you're running as a Republican, you have some challenges. You're battling locally. You're battling the national, nonstop, 24/7 press cycle, mainstream media, berating of anything that's conservative leaning, anything that's other than this far left ideology in most circles, frankly.
Sure.
Does the local Smithtown town councilman have to deal with that? Well, not necessarily, but if there's a Democratic candidate running against that local council person, they're going to get the following, and they're going to tie themselves into some of those ideals that we're hearing from our folks on the other side.
Now, when you ran for sheriff, as opposed to, let's say, somebody running for the legislature or the county executive position, it's law enforcement. How is that, and I kind of maybe know the answer, but I want to hear it from you. How is that different when you're running for something that's tied to law enforcement as opposed to a politician?
My advice, and it's not that I'm some political expert, but I think I've learned certainly a couple of things. Regardless of the office, I think people are tired of polarizing politics. People are tired of the fringes, and I think they're looking for more mainstream moderates on both sides. Gone are the days of the JFK Democrat,
Right.
and gone are the days in some respects of the Ronald Reagan Republican. And I think that you'd be well advised to find yourself moving towards the middle from both sides. If you are moving more towards the left and you're looking to appeal towards that segment of the population of where you can look at voter rolls and you could see, okay, Democratic registration is up or Republican registration is up. Maybe mathematically that may look good on paper, but at the end of the day, it's who's coming out to the polls and what
to get the vote out.
And how are you going to appeal to people's issues while having the party affiliation and the letter after your name almost as a secondary issue. People are tired of party lines, partisan politics. Now, I can tell you that there's a certain segment of the population that no matter what happens,
We'll always vote Republican or Democrat, whatever.
straight down the line.
Absolutely.
Right? You look at the ballot referendum. In my case, the Constitutional Convention, I think in a lot of respects, brought out some folks who were probably not voting for me and were voting, based on some ideological, issues based on from the union or from wherever it was coming from. That's traditionally going to be Democratic voters.
Right.
So they're going to go straight down the line. Same on the Republican side. But if you can appeal to people and get the issue that's important to them, water quality, taxes, whatever the issue is, and those could be
Taxes
from
big.
local, county, that's important, and that's going to equal votes, and people want to be able to connect with you on that.
It's funny you say gone are the days of the like a JFK Democrat. I say if he came back today and his father Joe wasn't alive, he'd be a Republican. He lowered taxes, a lot of things he did.
Yep.
That wouldn't be, certainly not a liberal.
Well, if you look to a lot, I mean, you look at, obviously Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? It's on everyone's mind. And nonstop coverage, which in some respects is good, in some respects is bad. You look at the party leadership, you look at Nancy Pelosi, she's not thrilled with what's happening. You look at the local, the other statewide Democrats, that are not happy with, forget about the Amazon deal, just her overall persona, and that the fringes are not necessarily. You may have had a little blue ripple, and she may have won in a traditionally, district that was going to be held by the old guard. I don't know that that's going to continue for 2 years from now. So.
Yeah, what's interesting is not to equate the two, but just like how when Trump came onto the landscape, and you know who he was before that, she came out of nowhere, but he just sucked all the oxygen out of the room.
Yep.
And there were people like Christie and Jeb that were big names that in any other year would have got traction.
It became, I think, in some respects, a battle of anybody but the establishment, right? He's one of 17. And we kind of talked about it off air before the show that people were laughing. It's never going to happen. All the experts, all the pundits. Meanwhile, the guy just kept surviving no matter what happened. And he's brash. He's a lot of things that are not good. And
a lot of the stuff was baked in. So when things came out, you're like, yeah, I know all about him.
Right. I mean, he's got a long history. And the irony is that supported Democrats in the past, was a Democrat.
Absolutely.
All the pictures start to come out. He's at the Clinton's wedding, right? All these things. But now he's painted as
Sharpton.
But now he's a horrible man, right? Now
he's never a racist before, but now he's a racist. But the point was now AOC is just grabbing the headlight, the headlights, highlights, and the problem is a lot of the Democrats don't like that. But she's a rock star now.
She's a rock star, but I think the more she talks and the more it's these outrageous sound bites, right? If you're a Republican running in 2020 and you're thinking about next year, the presidential race, if you're doing oppo and you're doing opposition research and you're listening to all this, you're just filing these things away. And you're going to look to tie your Democratic opponent to her all day long.
And it's easier because it's not, you could look at her and say she's fringe, but she's not, because a lot of people are lining up behind her, even some of the ones that are running for POTUS.
They're
right. Saying, I agree with that green plan, or I agree with this,
But think about that, right? So you got the Cory Bookers of the world and the Kamala Harris of the world, and Gillibrand, who they caught in New Hampshire was, whoever her handlers were probably had a really bad day. But they turned, they hit the microphone in her face, and she said, "Oh yeah, of course I embrace the New Deal." Embrace the New Deal. You didn't even read it, right?
And that could be fatal to say that.
I think it's going to come back to haunt. You're going to hear that soundbite again.
But I love whenever she's out there talking, like with Amazon, right? Now I read that de Blasio was saying they just didn't want to go there. They said they were just fed up with the politicians and they weren't embracing them.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to build it. Do you know how many jobs? And Ocasio-Cortez made it sound like they're crappy jobs. They're not crappy jobs.
Even if they were crappy jobs,
they're jobs.
Right, they're jobs. Even if it's 50% of what their estimate is, it's 12,500 jobs, right? Because they always estimate.
And those people eat, and those people have to travel into the area, and they shop.
And they interviewed as a gentleman from the luncheonette or a dinette or a diner who, this man was counting on this business. What about the real estate investors, folks who were hedging their bets on being able to go in there and rent to the people who needed to live there?
The tax base. Oh my God.
It's like you could argue the $3 billion in exemptions and whatever else it was going to be. And I heard kind of an off the cuff soundbite where she thought there was that we were actually going to pay Amazon the $3 billion, right? So it's a lot of it's going to play out. But you talk to some economists and you talk to people who know cyclical from 10, 15, 20 years from now. This is going to affect Long Island as well.
I think it's going to have a profound effect.
It's not just going to stay in Queens. It's going to make its way into Nassau and into Suffolk County. And look at the
and who knows who else would have come here? When Amazon comes
That's
here,
right.
Other companies could have said, they're going there, so we're going to go there too.
Well, the Research Triangle in North Carolina was never the Research Triangle in North Carolina until it was the Research Triangle in North Carolina. Right. So why not? We had a really grand opportunity here.
Like Silicon Valley, companies had to come there to make it Silicon Valley, and that could have been the start of something big.
And you look at the how the IDC played into this, and the dissolution of the IDC, and the Democrats in the state Senate getting control, and how all of those all those pieces moving together. It's all interrelated, and the the governor and is fighting with the Senate, and the balance of power shifting.
Yes.
All of that's related. And if you don't understand that, then you really understand politics. But it's all
It's
connected.
a dirty business, I always
It is
say.
a dirty business.
Now, with regard, you mentioned a little while ago taxes. Now, that's a big issue here, because I talk to people in other parts of the country and I tell them what I pay in taxes, and they think I have like the Ponderosa, or some massive piece of property.
Yeah.
And it's not. I know people that are paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 in other states, and they have a pretty substantial house. And I know we can't just overnight lower the taxes because we have school taxes and all that, but what can the politicians do to try to take that problem on?
This is not going to be popular, but I'm going to say it for whoever is going to be the county executive candidate or the sitting county executive. I don't know where else we can go, right? We have depending on who you talk to, close to a $3 billion structural deficit. We have multiple bond ratings, downgrading in bond ratings, right? Junk bond status.
Costs more money to borrow.
Right? Red light camera revenue. We'll talk about red light cameras, a whole separate show.
I was going to
right?
say, that could be another show.
Red light cameras in general, but the revenue associated with that overestimated. Sales tax revenue overestimated. You have significant municipal contracts that are substantial.
Right.
Where else are you going? You have no choice but to raise taxes, and people say that's crazy. It may be crazy, but do the math on it.
It's either that or slash.
I don't know
And
where
a
else
lot
it's
of
going to
people
come
don't
from,
want
and
that
how
to
much
happen.
can you slash? I mean, $3 billion. That's a really big deficit.
We can't print money like the federal government.
No, we
so
can't.
We're at a bit of a disadvantage because that's also tied with people leaving the county.
They're voting with their feet.
Right. They want to move someplace else. You see it in California, New York. But what can we do? Like you said, take on some of these contracts, but that's not popular.
It's not popular, and maybe it's a balance between all of that, but I think you're going to have to take a real hard look. There's going to have to be some slashing, right? You're going to have to tighten the belt, do more with less, right? If you work for the state or you work for a local municipality, you've been hearing that for the better part of a decade.
Right.
Do more with less, do more with less, but there's not much more we could do with the less that we have. So at some point, you really need to look. It's math. And I went to law school. People say, "Oh, you're a lawyer. I'm not an accountant." No, I didn't go to school to be an accountant. But the math is simple. It's not rocket science. If you're taking in less than you're spending, you have a problem and you have a deficit, and that's what we have. So it's going to take some real creative ideas. But I think that state and local. You look at school taxes. I mean, there's all of the people need to work together. The problem is that none of them want to work together.
No, they don't want their budget slashed. Now I remember I went to law school with Tom Swazi, who's now he's in the House of Representatives.
Yes.
And he was a county executive in Nassau, and he took on the police and he tried to come up with some of these things. And what happened?
He was voted out.
He was voted out. So a lot of politicians that are in there, they don't want to take on that, but they're just kicking the can down the road in a sense. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's beyond that. I mean, certainly the police contract is a big portion of it, but look at some of the schools. I mean, you think about all of the not duplication of services, but how many school districts we have and the services they get, and who's piercing the tax cap and who's not. And you look at some of the fat that's in there, right? And you say to yourself, I don't know. I mean, you look at your school taxes are a big portion of that, probably the bigger portion of your taxes, and you have to just scratch your head. We are the 50th out of 50 states with which people have a desire to retire in. If you're a state worker, you're gone.
This ain't the place.
You're going to retire and you're going to leave.
I would say if someone gave you a house and you have to pay $15,000 a year and you're on a fixed income.
Where does that come from?
Greener pastures, you go down south, you don't have to worry necessarily about the other expenses that you're paying. What is it, 8 point something, and some other states have no state income tax?
State income tax. $1,400 a year for property taxes. A gallon of milk is cheaper, gas is cheaper, insurance is cheaper, things in general. So I think that it's a tough challenge, and if John Kennedy is successful, and I'm hoping that he is, and I'm going to do anything I can to help him, people need to be patient. That would be my message to everybody. If you're watching this, if John Kennedy is the next county executive, you need to be patient with him. This cannot be
And
fixed
I had him
overnight.
on the show a few weeks ago, and he's like a numbers wonk. He really has the numbers because he's a controller, Suffolk County controller, and he talks about things in terms of the numbers, which are important, like you said. You can't just talk about in the abstract.
Yeah,
You have to say, this is what we're going to cut. Or, you know what, we have to go after the people that are ripping us off. He does audits.
Yeah.
And there are companies that are ripping us off. And that's another source of money. Maybe that won't close the whole budget, but if enough we can go after enough of these people that's going to send the message out. Don't screw around with us.
Well, municipal contracts in general, right, is if you're an auditor anywhere, if you work for the state controller's office or the local comptroller, if it's me, I'm looking at all these contracts and how many, multiple year bids and who's getting the contracts and where that money is actually going, and are we getting the best value for our dollar?
Sure. Now, where do you see yourself down the road? I'm sure you love your position. What do you see down the road? What would you like to accomplish?
I have my law practice. Practicing law part time, as I'm sure you can understand, it's very tough to do. So my regular job is my job, and I still work on the weekends.
So you're a busy guy. I thought I was busy.
4 kids are expensive. Am I done with politics? Absolutely not. People say, "What are you going to do for the next sheriff's race?" It's 3 years from now. There's a lot can happen in 3 months from now. So I think I'll still stay involved. I think I'm certainly going to consider runs in the future. I'm a public servant through and through. So anything I could do to help my community or the county of Suffolk, I'm on board for. I'm all signed up, and people can count on that.
We're kind of running out of time, but just very briefly, our county executive is Balone. Now, what things do you see that he could have done better? Have you thought about that?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is the issue with the former chief of department, Burke. I manage people. I hire people. I fire people. I think you need to understand that when you lose confidence or there's this overwhelming evidence that your people are not doing the right thing, and I'm using very mild terms.
Relied on Spoda. We saw that where that got him.
Even that, they say stuff rolls downhill, but stuff also rolls up there. And I'm a big believer in that the fish rots from the head, and whoever's the head of the agency, whether it's 10 people or 10,000 people, the buck stops with them, and there has to be some responsibility taken for that. So that's a part of it. Not to mention the fact that the finances are really in shambles. There's no way to explain how we went from where we were 8 years ago to where we are now. It's scary.
Where did the time go?
We blinked and it was over. So I tell my kids, you're going to go to school. It's sad, but I want them to go away and really not think about coming back because it's not sustainable.
Right, that's it. And I worry, look, I make a good living. I have my own law practice. But I look at my kids and the next generation and other people. If you don't make, and I did a post the other day, I said, if you don't make a decent amount of money or a lot of money here, it is hard to live here in Suffolk County.
Well, it's almost impossible. You think about student loans and all the other things that this generation has to face.
I wish you had more time to talk about higher education. I got to bring you back.
Bring me back to that. We can talk about that for three hours.
We could do that, but we got to kind of wrap things up. But I really appreciate you coming on. It's very important. Like I said, I had Leslie Kennedy on. I had John Kennedy. I want to hear, and I don't only want to hear from Republicans. I want to hear from Democrats. Let people hear the positions of the people that are in the know.
Rule number one: if you want to be in public office, you have to answer. You answer to the people. You're supposed to be in it for the right reasons. And people too often, I think, are afraid to answer those questions. But come on the show, whoever you are.
Come on the show. I want to really appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you. My pleasure, Phil. Thank you.
Want to thank you. Hit like and share if you see this show on Facebook or YouTube. You can see it on YouTube, WLINY Internet Radio. In about a week or two, this show will be up. This show will be seen on Saturday at 10 a.m. on Channel 115 and also Thursday at 1 a.m. on Channel 20. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to Finding Common Ground here on Altice. I'm attorney Phil Jusino, and this segment is called Frequently Asked Law Questions. The first question is, what do I do if I want custody of my child? If you're married, you have two choices. You can go to Supreme Court with a divorce, or you can go to family court. If you're not married, you have a child out of wedlock, you have to go to family court. Let's focus in for a second on what to do if it's a divorce action. You would you'd see an attorney, you would file a divorce action, and that attorney would have the other party served. Or the case could be started with a letter to say, let's try to not beat up on each other, let's see if we can resolve this amicably. But in any event, if you and your spouse cannot agree to terms, the case will ultimately go to court. If you want a court order, the case has to go to court anyway. If it's a divorce, it would go to Supreme Court matrimonial part. If it's family court, it will go to family court. How does the case get started? If it's in family court, you file a petition. You could do it yourself. You can go down to Central Islip or Riverhead in Suffolk County. That's where the family courts are. And you can get the packet, you could fill it out if you know how to do it. They help you out a little bit, but you're kind of on your own. You'll fill out the paperwork, you have to put some information in, and you got to make sure you put the enough information in there to establish why you want custody. Normally you would say, I'm the primary caregiver to the child, or I am more fit than the other parent, or the other parent's in jail. Some reason why you should have custody over that other party. Or you might want joint custody. You could put that in there too. But you give them a little bit of the facts. In other words, let's say it's the mother that's filing the petition. She's a stay-at-home mom, and dad works 12 hours a day. Mom might say, I'm the primary caregiver. Or if it's the father that's the Mr. Mom, he might say, I'm the primary caregiver. Or if the other party has an alcohol problem or a drug problem, you'd want to put that in the petition, because the judge or the referee will read that document, should read it before the case is even called. And they'll get a little sense, okay, this person is alleging the other party has a drug problem. You want them to know that. Now, that might not be true, but at least the judge is reading that. So with a divorce or family court, when the case comes to court, depending on how old the child is, or children, it might be more than one, the court can appoint an attorney for the child. If the child is an infant, they can also do that. Sometimes they don't. If you have a 6-month-old, you might not appoint a law guardian to represent the interests of that child, because the child can't communicate with the attorney for the child. Sometimes a judge will say, you know what, I want another set of eyes on this case, so I'm going to ask for an attorney for the child. In a Supreme Court case, the parties pay for that, unless they're indigent, but generally in a divorce action, the parties pay for the attorney for the child in some proportion to their income. So if the husband is making 100 and the wife makes 50, the husband will pay 2/3 to 1/3. If they make about the same, 50-50. If the case is in family court, generally speaking, the tab is picked up by the court or the state, county. The parties don't have to fork over any money for the attorney for the child. Some judges, where let's say you have a couple that has money, the judge might say, I'm not going to do it panel rate. I'm going to do it more than that. Or let's say it's an attorney that's a private attorney, and he would normally get, let's say, $400 an hour. They might say he's going to get $400 an hour because the parties each make over 6 figures. I've seen that happen. What is the role, let's get to that. What is the role of the attorney for the child in a custody case? Now, it may be custody or maybe parenting time, but where that issue has not been resolved. Their job is to represent the interest of the child or children. Generally, if the kids all have, let's say, one mindset, they all want to live with mom or they all want to live with dad, let's say, the court might appoint or keep one law guardian. If, let's say, they appoint a law guardian for 2 kids, and one kid says, I want to live with mom, one kid says, I want to live with dad, the court could appoint separate attorneys for the child because their interests are not the same, not consistent. All right? So that could happen. You might have 2 attorneys for the child. I've never seen 3, but you can have more than 1. So their job is to communicate with the child or children. Sometimes they will speak to the parent or parents. Sometimes they won't. It depends on how they see that case. Sometimes they might have a 15-year-old kid, and it's enough just to speak to that 15-year-old kid. You might have a 6-month-old where the judge says, I want an attorney for the child. In that case, the attorney for the child may speak to mom and may speak to dad to get a sense of what's going on. Also, the attorney for the child can go to the respective homes to get a sense of, all right, when the child is with mom, what is that house like? When it's with dad, what is that house like? When I was a law guardian, and that's what we used to call it way back when, instead of attorney for the child, that's a newer name, I would go to the house. I'd want to see what are the sleeping arrangements? What's the kitchen look like? Is it a neat house? Are there any dangers in that house? Are there exposed wires? I was in a house one time where there were exposed wires and it wasn't a safe place. I wouldn't have known that because nobody told me that until I went to the house. If it's the Law Guardian Bureau, they don't always send the attorney out there. They could send somebody that works for them. It might not be an attorney, it might be a paralegal or somebody who can report back to that attorney. And what else does the law guardian or the attorney for the child do? They, at the trial, they get to question the witnesses just like the mother's attorney and the father's attorney. And one thing that the other attorneys don't get to do, at the end of a trial, if the case can't settle and the case goes to trial, at the end of the trial, if the child is old enough to speak, they bring that child or the children into the judge's chambers. It's called an in-camera interview. And in that room will be the child or children. And now if it's more than one child, sometimes they'll separate them because they may not want one child to be influenced, let's say, by the other child. But however they decide to do it, the child or children are brought into the judge's chambers. The judge is there. The attorney for the child is there. A court reporter is there, a court officer, and the child or children. If I'm representing mom or dad, I'm not allowed in that room, nor would the other attorney be. We can submit questions. So based on the trial, let's say, I might say, ask the child what happened in the park in the summertime, because I want that to be fleshed out. Because don't forget, the kids don't testify at trial. So dad might say one thing, mom might say another. How do we know what the truth is? Sometimes you need to ask the child, do you remember that incident? Yes, dad did this or mom did that. So that's important. I can submit questions. They don't have to ask any of my questions. They can ask all, some, or none. Same with the other attorney. And we're never really going to know what goes on in there. Unless that child tells one of the parents, it's really supposed to be private. Now, how do you get in? A little while ago we said you can go to Supreme Court or family court, depending if you're married or not. And we said you'd file a petition, and we talked about that. In Supreme Court, you would file a summons and complaint. And that would get you into court. That wouldn't be that detailed. But once you get into court, at a preliminary conference, if custody is an issue, the attorneys would say to the judge, we need an attorney for the child. Or we don't need an attorney for the child. It's up to the judge. Sometimes they appoint somebody right away. Sometimes they wait because there's a cost involved in Supreme. So they might say, look, we're going to give you the opportunity to have a sit down and maybe resolve the issue of custody and parenting time. So you don't have to spend a few $1,000s getting this attorney for the child. If you come back on the next court date, usually 6 weeks later, could be 4, could be 8, and you can't resolve it, then we will give you an attorney. What happens when my case goes to trial? A little while ago we said at a trial, the law guardian gets to question the witnesses. Well, at a trial, the petitioner who filed the petition goes first. The petitioner's attorney will call whoever they want to call that's relevant. They can call their client first. They can call his mother, his aunt, a witness who saw an event take place. Can be an expert witness, could be a teacher. I have a custody case pending now where I recently called the pediatrician of the child, and that person was allowed to testify. It could be, if there's forensics, you could call the forensic psychologist or psychiatrist. The petitioner calls the witness and questions that witness. The respondent, who's responding to the petition, would then get to question that witness next. So you have petitioner, respondent, and then the attorney for the child would go last and would get to question. Now it's interesting because the petitioner who's calling their witness is the friendly questioner. They're not going to try to trip up the witness, generally speaking, unless they call somebody and hope to get what they call a hostile witness status, where they're calling, let's say, the other side. Now there's a thing called vouching. If you call a witness, he's supposed to say they're credible. There's an exception if they're a hostile witness. So let's say my first witness, I want to call the respondent. Can I do that? The answer is yes. Now, sometimes it's wise, sometimes it's not. If I call them, I really can't beat them up too much because I'm vouching for their credibility, and I'm not supposed to undercut, in a sense, their credibility, their testimony. But I need to because I want to show that my client, let's say, is a better parent than that person, or that that person is lying. If they get hostile on the stand, the court could say, hostile witness, you have a lot of leeway, Mr. Jusino, go for it. They're not going to say it that way. But then I could try to impeach their credibility. Or I might call the person's mother to catch them off guard. And I can then question the person like I would any other witness. After the law guardian or the attorney for the child questions that particular witness, the petitioner's attorney can do redirect. So it's direct, cross-examination, cross-examination. I can get up there and do redirect. So let's say the respondent's attorney roughed up my witness, made them look bad, or made them ask questions yes or no and didn't allow them to develop the answer. So I could say, isn't it true on that date you were in that car, yes or no? Yes, but I was not looking, or I was in the back seat, or I can say as the questioner of that witness, yes or no. You've answered the question, thank you. As the petitioner's attorney who called that witness, I'm listening carefully when they get cross-examined, because I'm going to get up there, I have a chance to go redirect and say, remember you were asked that question, were you in that car? And Mr. Jones said yes or no, and you said yes, but what's the but? Well, I was sleeping in the car. I didn't see anything. Or I had a splitting headache, so I had, my eyes covered. I was laying down. I didn't see anything. Or what happened in the front seat. Things like that. Right? At the end of the trial, again, the child goes in the room, talks to the judge, and then ultimately the judge renders a decision. Now, what happens if you don't like the decision? Let's say you're the petitioner and the respondent wins the case. Or if it's a divorce, you're the plaintiff and the defendant wins that issue for custody, or vice versa. In family court or Supreme, you can appeal. You appeal to the Second Judicial Department, they call it the Second Department, which is in Brooklyn, and a panel of judges will ultimately decide if that judge was correct or maybe misapplied the law and the case should go back and be reheard or make some other remedy. I had a case a long time ago where the judge, I felt, made a mistake, gave the kids, I had the mom, they weren't married, it was family court, to the father. Big mistake. And we appealed it, we got a stay, so the transfer didn't take place. That's called a stay, where you say, Judge, the judge in the family court made a mistake. My client's supposed to turn the kids over. It is, I think it was right before Christmas Eve. We don't want to do this. It shouldn't happen. Wait until the court ultimately makes a decision. And they can say, okay, nothing's going to happen. That order is not going to be followed until the panel has a chance to hear the case and make a decision. Ultimately, they sided with my client, didn't even send the case back. They said the judge was wrong, and the case ended up being where the mother got custody of the two kids. They were young, 8 and 10. What if you don't agree, let's say, with a child support decision? Now, this is a little bit different, but I want to show you the difference. With child support, and I had two recently where this happened, you don't appeal initially. You file an objection. So if it's a custody case and you're not happy with the decision, or a divorce case and you're not happy with the decision, you can file an appeal. With child support, you would file what they call an objection. What is an objection? An objection is pretty much the same thing as an appeal, but remember, with child support, it's a support magistrate. It's not a judge. You appeal from a judge. The support magistrate is just a support magistrate. They make a decision, it could stick. But you can file an objection where the case will go before a judge. A judge will then make a decision and say the support magistrate was correct or the support magistrate was wrong. If the support magistrate was wrong, there's a couple of things that they can do. They can send the case back and say, try it again, but this time the law that you applied was inaccurate, or you shouldn't have given the wife so much credit for a particular issue, or you shouldn't have held this against the husband. You made a mistake. Send it back. The court can also say, I'm sending it back, but I'm going to send it before a different support magistrate. Why? Maybe the judge felt that support magistrate was biased against the litigant that ultimately lost. I had a case a while ago. I wasn't the original attorney on the case. I got hired after the fact. But what happened was the support magistrate made a decision which was against the weight of the evidence. In other words, she made a mistake. And she didn't see it that way. And she chastised my client, who wasn't my client at the time, and it was clear to a judge that not only did she make a mistake, but, and again, I'm using a term in the vernacular, had it in for my client. And also said certain things on the record to my client, as well as a child that had testified, that indicated that there was a bias, or even a perceived bias, which is wrong. So they sent the case back. That's how I got on the case. So I was the attorney that ultimately tried the case again before a different support magistrate, and we won. And my client ultimately got what he wanted. Now, what if you, let's say, get a decision from the court, either Supreme or family, about custody, and time goes by, you don't appeal, and you live with it. And let's say a year or two later, things change. So let's say mom has custody, you didn't win, or you settled the case and you gave mom custody, but now things have changed. The child is a little bit older, wants to live with dad, let's say. Or mom becomes a drug addict, or mom becomes an alcoholic, or mom beats the kid, or mom starves the kid, or dad does those things. That's what they call a change in circumstances. Because you can't just come back to court and say, you know what, I didn't appeal, but I didn't like the decision. Here we are 2 years later, I want to change it. I want custody. That's not good enough. Or you settle the case, and a year or two goes by, and you say, you know what, man, what was I thinking? I shouldn't have settled it and given custody to mom. I should have fought. Well, you didn't. And that generally would not be enough. But you have to allege in the petition, or if you go to Supreme, in the moving papers, a change in circumstances. Usually it has to be unanticipated, because if it was something like the child is now 14, well, that wasn't unanticipated, because you might have negotiated when the child's 14, we'll revisit that order, or something along those lines. Or go to trial and take your chances. You always have that right to do. So let's say in family court, in the petition you allege a change. You're not just going to allege it, but you have to state it. You have to say, since the order, mom is now using drugs. Well, I said before, like using alcohol. Or mom and the child have been fighting a lot, and they don't get along, and it's a danger to have them in the same house. Or mom threw the kid out, or something like that. I have cases where someone gets arrested and goes to jail. Obviously, it's an easy one then. The other party would come and say, I got to get custody because the other parent is in jail. It's happened a number of times on both sides. So you would allege the change in circumstances, whatever that happens to be, and then at the trial, you have to prove it. It's not enough just to allege it. And it would be a trial. Just like I said before, the custody trial, you call witnesses. That's what happens. You call a witness, that witness would testify. It could be your client that testifies. And it's interesting because some people say, well, I don't have any witnesses. How can I win? If the party testifies, they have to testify, and is believed, it's not always how many witnesses you have. Look, if you have a number of great witnesses, I'd rather have that than maybe only have one witness. But it's quality, not quantity. I've won cases where my client gets up on the stand and testifies, and the other side calls their client and 3 witnesses. Doesn't matter. Those witnesses might not be quality witnesses, or they might be just saying something because they happen to be the mom, the aunt, and the uncle of the parent. So the judge, can they testify? Of course they can. A mother can testify. A father can testify for the litigant. But they judge it in that light. Doesn't mean they don't believe it. They can be very credible. But you judge it in that light, meaning, okay, this is the mother testifying. This is grandma. So I take it from where it comes. Doesn't mean I don't believe it, but I got to factor that in. All right? So I'm going to be looking at her very carefully. Is she telling the truth? Is she covering for her child? Has she ever covered for her child? I have cases where, let's say, there's a history of the mother covering for the child, not calling CPS when the parent was on drugs and the child was in danger. If that parent now of the litigant testifies, the court might say, well, you know what? In the past, you didn't do the right thing. I've had cases like that. You didn't come forward and take that child or notify the other parent, hey, look, Sue's on drugs, you got to do something. Right? That's very important. Right? So you come to court, you prove that there's a change in circumstances, and then the judge has to decide how to change the order. Remember, there's an order. You're seeking to modify. You're not coming to get an order. If, let's say, 2 people have a baby and the child's now 2 and mom wants custody, mom would file a petition, or if they're married, a divorce, and would seek custody. You don't have to show a change in circumstances because it's not a modification. When you want to modify child support, when you want to modify parenting time or custody, anything like that, you have to show a change, generally a significant change in circumstances warranting the change. So the judge could say, okay, I'm convinced there's a significant change, but I don't think we need to do anything as drastic as the parent who filed the petition. Or they can. They could say, custody is with you now. I'm taking custody away from mom, and you're the custodial parent. Now, what other issues are in family court? We talked about custody, we talked about parenting time, we talked a little bit about child support. In a divorce action, there's also property. They call it equitable distribution. I'm not going to get into, I've done other shows where I really get into equitable distribution, but for purposes of today, equitable distribution is how property is divvied up. So if there's a house, who gets the house? Is it divvied up equally? Is it divvied up 2/3, 1/3? Is it going to be sold? Does the custodial parent who gets custody get to stay in the house until the child graduates high school? These are all issues that have to be addressed in a divorce. In family court, you don't see equitable distribution. You can't fight for equitable distribution in family court. You have to go to Supreme Court. You can get child support in family court. You can get maintenance in family court. You can get medical coverage in family court. Custody, of course. You can get orders of protection in family court. You can get guardianship, but you can't have a court decide assets like a house, a car, a boat, or a pension. So if there's a pension or 401k or an IRA, that is all property that has to be divvied up in a divorce action. Now, this is an interesting twist. Let's say men and a woman are not married and they have a child, or don't have a child. I'm just using it as an example. They can go to family court and fight over a whole host of issues. But let's say they own a house and they're not married. There's no divorce. They don't go to divorce court or Supreme Court, matrimonial part, right? If they want to address the issues involving the child, that's family court. What do they do about the house? I just said you can't take care of that in family court. You file a partition action. So both parties own the house, they're on the deed, and one of the parties says, I got to sell the house. I got to move on. There's equity, I want to get my piece, and I'll see you. And the woman says, no, I have no place to go. In a divorce action, that's easy. You go to Supreme and they address it. In a partition action, and partition could be, they don't have to have a kid together. It could be two brothers on a piece of property, or a mother's son, or anybody that's not married. Because if they're married, you would go to Supreme. But anybody that's on a deed, two people that are on a deed, three people, four, it doesn't matter. That would be a partition action, and the court in a partition action decides what happens to the property. Generally, sell it and divvy it up in some proportion. If it's a, let's say, joint tenancy or tenants in common, that gets factored in. It might be 50-50, or if one party can prove they put down more money, the court could say it goes 2/3, 1/3. Orders of protection are also addressed in family court, right? That could also be addressed in Supreme Court, but most judges will say, go to family court. Or if there's a criminal charge, let's say there's a married couple and the husband hits the wife. She has a choice. She can go to family court without having him arrested and get an order of protection in family court with the same rights as if she went into criminal court. In other words, it can kick him out of the house. It can say that he can't harass, annoy, alarm, or harass her, meaning he could stay in that house with her, but if he threatens her, she can call the police and have him arrested very easily. Or if he is not living there and he calls her and he says, I'm going to get you, all she's got to do is pick up the phone. If it's a complete stay away, he cannot go near her at all. And generally, he can't call his friend and say, can you talk to her, some sense into her? I need to see her. Third-party contact, that's generally not allowed. If the children or child are in the order of protection and it's a stay away, until it gets resolved with a subsequent order of parenting time, that father can't even see the kids, might not even be able to call the kids. I had one recently where we had to modify it so that the father could at least see the kids. Now, generally, the order of protection that's a stay away will say the father can see the children, let's say the children's names are mentioned, as per a subsequent order of a court of competent jurisdiction. What's competent jurisdiction? If it's a married couple, competent jurisdiction would be Supreme Court, matrimonial part, or family court. If the party is not married, the only court of competent jurisdiction would be family court. And then family court could say, we're not going to touch the order of protection, that's going to remain. But we're going to carve out a time when dad can go to mom's house, or maybe at the precinct, or at a McDonald's, and dad can see the kids under those conditions. But he can't just show up on a Tuesday if the parenting time is Wednesday. You have to follow the order. If you don't follow the order, you got a problem. We're running out of time in this segment. I want to thank you for watching the show. Larry Zacharis was my guest the first half of the show. I want to thank him. If you have any questions, any follow-up questions to some of the things I discussed, you can give me a call and we can discuss it. 631-588-3155. Also, you can go to JusinoLaw.com. That's my website. I have a wealth of information on that website as well. Thank you for watching.